Hey everybody, I'm Paul. I'm an addict. I thought of a lot of things I was going to say about sponsorship. I hope I can talk for a while about it. Because my first experience with Narcotics Anonymous was 1982, and it was in an area that covered from probably the north side of Chicago all the way to Michigan City, which is a pretty big area. There was like maybe 10 meetings, and somebody who had a year or two clean time. That was, if you wanted to just be pure NA, and I let that run my program, the little program that I had, and there was nobody that I saw that I could confide in. So I went without a sponsor, and needless to say, I was in and out, and I finally went back out there after a couple of years. I had this friend who, ironically, he lived down. I had met him at one of my first meetings when I finally was settling down after my treatment, and I was going to meetings, and it was in the area where I worked, and he lived right down the street from me. We lived on the same street. He lived about 4 or 5 blocks down, and we wound up going to this one meeting in Illinois that's still in existence today, one of the older meetings in the Calumet region, and we were friends, and the guy tried to help me. He, at the time, he had like a month more, I had a month more clean time than him, and I say clean time, it wasn't. He probably had a better program, and he tried his best. I eventually went back out there, and he moved on with his life. He stayed with the program, and let me back up for a second. He won one of these books. It was at a picnic that we had. It was a second edition, and he read it. And back in those days, I'll tell you, if there was a book at a meeting, you better have the money to buy it then, because it wasn't going to be there the next meeting. They'd go to areas sometimes wherever they had it back then, and there'd be 2 books there, And if you managed to buy it and bring it back to your meeting, someone would buy it that day, Well, anyways, he won this book at a picnic drawing, and he read it and gave it to me. And like I heard somebody share earlier at the previous workshop here, he had that book, and that book just followed me around. I moved 3 or 4 times, and that book was still there. Well, anyways, my disease progressed, and I wound up in getting fired from my job at 13 years, I think, at that time. And I was almost 40 years old at the time. And I was a son of a steel worker, so, I was pretty well resigned to, being a steel worker. This was my life, and, at 40, I wasn't really thinking of career changes, and I had a craft. I'm a craft person out there, and I was put in a detox. I got caught, and I don't like to say that it was part of that I was solely responsible, but first couple of times they hauled me into their clinic. They didn't have drug testing. Well, this time they did, and I got caught with opiates in me, and I've been probably a 20-year affair with opiates at the time, on and off, mostly on, and they put me in this detox, and guys from the union told me, well, you better follow this program, because if you want to get your job back, this is what's you're going to have to play by different rules. And I said yes, because, I was one of them guys. I did illegal things, but that job was my, main foundation of, me living. And at the time, I wasn't ready to walk away. I wasn't ready to start over. So I went along, I went into this detox, and I was still pretty sick. But I realized somewhere in that detox, I'm going to have to do some of these things that they told me to do, the 90 meetings, and get a sponsor was one of them, So I got out, and I went to a meeting one night. The next night, it was like Thanksgiving. I got out the day before Thanksgiving or something like that. And I got the day after. And went to a meeting that night that wasn't in existence when I was around before. But the next morning, I went to this other meeting that I used to go to. There was my friend sitting there across the table, and I guess I looked that bad in the 6 years he hadn't seen me. And he said to me, he said, when I reintroduced myself, he remembered me right away. He says, my prayers were answered. I said, what prayers? I prayed for you while you were in there, while you were out there. And I sat there for a couple of minutes, let the meeting go on, and started talking to him. And I somewhere in there, I was thinking, well, I get this guy as a sponsor because I do know him a little bit, And he also had showed me that he had like a 8-year coin or something at that time, or some whatever it was, I really can't remember. And they didn't have that stuff when we were first, no coins or key tags and all that stuff. But I said, well, I got nothing to lose. I might as well, this guy knows me a little bit, he knows some of my history, and there's not that many secrets. So I asked him, he said yes, gave me his, I think he had a different phone number. I didn't have it anymore, But he did ask me one thing, hey, you got my book? I said, as a matter of fact, I saw it this morning, before I came to the meeting. I couldn't get rid of it. I tried to give it away, throw it in the garbage, and it always kept popping up, So I says, next time I hook up with you, and he told me what meetings he went to. He said he didn't go to this one very often, but I brought him his book, and that's why I told you a story about the book, But that's not why he agreed to sponsor me, and he's been my sponsor for 19 years, I'm not one of these guys that go looking for the answer that, I got the answer, and if the guy don't give it to me that I want to hear, I'm going to go get another sponsor, or I got to have what I think, like I've run into quite a bit around the fellowship, is people that are looking for someone that's going to give them the answer, or the best sponsor in the world, the guy who's got like 40 years and, is perfect. That's not. I realized this guy was more like me, he used to work in the same kind of industry as I did, and we actually, geographically, we're in the same area. The only little difference we had, he was in the military, I wasn't, And but we had a lot of things where we probably almost met, So when I started out, I got my job back, and I started somewhere along the line. I realized I better start calling this guy, and I bugged him every day, and he had a lot going. He was losing his business, which he inherited, and he had some tough times when I was first getting clean. A lot tougher than I had. I had my job back, had a good paying job. I wound up buying my first house, and You know, this guy was losing everything. You know, he was working minimum wage jobs. The IRS was banging on his door for money, and but he maintained. You know, I'd call him up whining about something, how somebody did something wrong to me at work, and man, this guy got the world caving in, and I could almost felt like I couldn't tell him my problem because mine was so small compared to his. You know, when he would tell me a little bit what was going on in his life, mine was chicken shit stuff, you know. It was, you know. I had my job, I had insurance, I had all that, I had a car, you know. And, well, as the years go on, we worked some steps, and, you know, he helped me out, and his life moved on, and he got a good job with a car company and doing all right. And I don't know what. The only advice I gave him probably was, you better get a job with a pension, you know what I mean? You know, and he finally did, and it was more concern for his well-being, and because he's about the same age as I am, a little bit older, but anyways, I believe in one sponsor. You know, that's the way he taught me. And he also taught me that you call me, I don't call you. And the only time he's ever called me was just recently. And I'll get on to that in a minute, you know. But as it goes through the years, you know, a lot of times I'd go a while, wouldn't see him, wouldn't call him, you know, because my need for a sponsor was mostly when my sponsees had problems, you know, and I'm stuck, you know, and you know, then I would call them, you know, and I'm guilty of not using them the way I should. Although there was a lot of times he had some health issues and other things that was, but I didn't abuse my sponsor, I don't think, you know, and he was always there for me. On my last anniversary, I decided to go to this treatment center where I was in, and I was feeling pretty good, and I usually like to hit it. You know, I'm usually on vacation that week, but I go in this treatment center, and I bought some donuts for the meeting, and he was sitting there. I said, how the hell does that happen? And if you called him up today, he wouldn't tell you what day my clean date is. We don't have that kind of relationship. I don't know when his clean date is. I couldn't even tell you how many years he has. But that's not what it's all about. It's like, you know, well, I wish you have, to me, you know, it's there for the real problems, you know. And I kind of was a little, apologized to him for not being a good sponsee and calling him every month like everybody else. I don't know where he lives right now. I know the town he lives in. I'm about where he lives. I've never been to this house. He moved about 5 years before, no, about 3 or 4 years ago. Got his phone number though. That's the most important thing, you know. I don't need to go to his house, or, you know, he doesn't need to come to mine really. I mean, he's welcome, but, you know. But I kind of lost myself there for a minute, but anyways, I apologize for being a kind of a bad sponsee, and he asked me, he said, are you still clean? He said, yeah. He said, you've been a great sponsee, you know. You know, I guess I've been kind of easy because I've worked the program. He comes to these events once in a while, conventions and whatnot. We bump into each other there, and we talk, and you know, we talk on the phone, and you know, he's really old school, but he's a sponsor who has a sponsor, and his sponsor has a sponsor, and that's what I believe in. And that's the way I was taught. Nobody should be running around telling people what to do and how to work a program when they ain't got nobody else telling them to work a program, you know. So when you're looking for a sponsor, it's real important to ask those questions. And I believe that you have the right to. You know, ask him their sponsor got a sponsor, and their sponsor, and it goes down the line, you know. But he's been there. Although last time I spoke at some sort of thing we had in our area, he showed up late. And he said, man, I didn't realize you were, he knew I was speaking, and he wanted to show up. Not that I'm a great circuit speaker or anything like that, but anyways, and I don't believe in opposite sexes, you know, men sponsoring women or women sponsoring women. And my wife does it. She's been clean as long as I have, and she does it. And if she is sitting in that front row right now, I'd say it in front of her. You know, she knows how I feel about it, you know. And I just don't see the problem. And she wouldn't like it if I sponsored a woman, believe me. You know, there'd be a war. Trust me. And, you know, but there was times that, you know, I'd want to pick up the phone, and a few times I did never get a hold of him, talk to his wife, although she's in recovery too, and you know, we talk program, and she's been helpful too. She does counseling too. But I'm not exactly sure. A couple of county services, but it's drug and alcohol related, so sometimes when you pick up the phone, you don't get who you want, but you still get something you need, you know. And well, about a month ago, this is where I'm going to get to the only time he's ever called me, and not that I don't have any animosity or something, is that my father passed away, and I was hurting pretty bad. So we picked up the phone, and I called him, and, you know, I was hurting pretty bad that day, although I thought I prepared myself pretty well for that day. And it wasn't like I thought it was going to be, and I picked it up, and I talked to him, and he told me to try to make it up there. It was quite a drive where they had the funeral, and for him, anyways. And he had some other things going on that day, and but he did call me to make sure I was all right, you know. And although when I sponsor people, sometimes because of the nature of my job and everything else, I do call people back when they leave me a message, you know. But that's my only exception to calling people back, calling sponsees. You know, I have a couple sponsors. Well, I only got one right now at the moment, you know. I've had guys at work I sponsored. You know, one guy didn't even remember me. He was he's in another craft, and he's standing there talking to me for like a half hour. You don't remember me, huh? Of course, I'm pretty sure he was using again, you know. But you know, I think some of the rules that were set down early in the other fellowship about sponsorship still applies to us. No exceptions. You know what I mean? You know, men sponsor men, one sponsor. You know. And I'll tell you, newcomers too, keep asking, you know, because you need somebody out there to be your friend anyways. You need somebody, and try and make sure that this person has some clean time. Don't get someone who's got 30 days more than you know. Although I know people, when they get on in like 15, 20 years and sponsors move on for whatever reason, they do have people with less time, but at one point, I don't think, because you have 20 years and your sponsor got 15, it's someone to keep your program in check that takes a little bit different view of how things are. You know, he can look at it from a different perspective than you can, you know, and that's why we need a sponsor, you know. And I think I've touched everything I wanted to say. You know, I hope I help you people out. Thank you for letting me share.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks, Paul. Our next speaker is Jonathan.
Hello, my name is Jonathan. I'm an addict. I'd like to take a moment of silence to ask God to come into this room today so that it'll be His words and not mine. Thank you. I want to thank the committee for asking me. I won't go into great detail, but I did offer to do a workshop, and I couldn't figure it out because I just knew that God wanted me to do whichever one I wasn't going to choose. So I just waited until they decided that, we need somebody to speak on sponsorship. So that's where I ended up, which was fine. This is where God wants me. So, and I'm going to try to start at the beginning. In the early 90s, because you're not foggy back there, I caught a case of a DUI, and I was sent to IOP, that's intensive outpatient, and there was a woman who did the classes, and she was a vegan. Didn't wear leather, and we weren't allowed to have anything that had caffeine in it, or we were allowed water, and that was it in the room. And so she was really strict in what she did, and very soft spoken. She sounded exactly the opposite of what she was like. But so I went through this whole class, and how it ends is I had to write I don't know what they called it at the time, but it's basically an autobiography of how much my addiction had cost me. And it ended up, I did write it, and I took it as an opportunity, because once I got into it, it was like, whoa, I really want to dump this crap, I really want to talk about it. So I wrote about 7 pages. And but it was strictly autobiographical with kind of costs attached to it. And I did that, and I had to read it in front of everybody, and then I was able to move on, and I got my license back, et cetera, et cetera. Then a few years later, I caught another case, and that was in the in the late 90s, and it was bad. I was looking at a few years, looking at a couple of felonies, a couple of misdemeanors, possession, intent to distribute, and they barely missed me on manufacturing within 100 feet of a school. And so it was kind of bad. And one of the things I had to do was go to this addiction counseling, and they assigned me to a guy who was in the other fellowship. And I had to meet one-on-one with him. And he gave me these things I had to fill out, and they had to do with the steps. We got through, and we actually did a 5th step. Through all of this, I was very confused. I had been introduced to the other fellowship. I started with identifying myself that way, and then I did the whole I'm this and that. And that's when all this was happening. And I did a 5th step and with him. And, I'm telling you, and this is God's honest truth, he said, okay, now drive home. On the way home, think about your character defects, and when you get home, pray to have them removed, and they're steps 6 and 7. So I thought that was kind of strange, but... And the reason I'm talking about this is because this prepared me for what I really needed to do when it came to sponsorship. I went to my first NA meeting, and it was a very small group. There were only, I think, 4 or 5 people who were at the meeting, and it was very inexperienced. Everybody was working both fellowships, or in both fellowships. Very mixed message. And I was doing the whole substitution in my mind of what they were talking about whenever I went to their fellowship. It was just a mess. a guy walked up to me and said, do you want me to sponsor you? And I go, okay. And never used him, never called. Happened to see him about 6 months later in November of '99. And, well, let me go back. When I first started going, it was in April of '99. And within the first 30 days of my home group, the treasurer relapsed and committed suicide, drove in front of a train. And I'll never forget that. About 9 months later, and again, I never used the sponsor, but I had him in name. I said, I'm going to go up to Michigan this weekend. Now, mind you, I had given up my drug of choice, but I was still using everything else because that made sense to me. My problem wasn't this and that and this and that. It was only my drug of choice. So, but I was going to go up to Michigan, and he said, don't go. And I said, okay. And then I went, of course. And I had this massive stroke. I was in the hospital for 17 days and in a coma for 17 days. I was in the hospital for almost 2 months. I came out, that's my clean date. That happened on November 13th of 1999. I never found an excuse good enough after that to use. But what I did find was someone who came to our meeting, I met a guy and he was coming to our meetings. He was in outreach, or he was doing outreach at the time at least. And he shared on who is an addict. And at least he quoted from the readings about who is an addict. And I cried because I knew that he had gone through what I had gone through. I'd never felt that way before. It was all an exercise in the mind before that. But in the meditation book, it talks about this. It says, as we open up to our sponsor, a bond develops between us. We disclose our secrets and develop confidence in our sponsor's direction. We share our concerns and learn the value of our sponsor's experience. We share our pain and are met with empathy. Now, and I'm not talking down to people, but the word empathy, I don't think people often know the definition. There's sympathy and there's empathy. Sympathy is when I feel sorry for somebody. Empathy is when I know how you feel because I've been through that. I've experienced that. And that's identification. And that's what this program is about. And that's why I'm in this program, because I identify with other addicts. You people think the same way I do. You've been to where I've been, and you guys found a way out. So I'm going to keep coming back. It says that the same principle that we used of trust that we've built with our sponsor can then be used to develop a relationship with our higher power. And that came later, but that in fact was the case. So I met this guy and I said, and he shared it at this meeting, he talked about, this is the way it was before we got here. And after coming to NA, we realized we were sick people, and I lost it at that time. And I went up to him, and I hee-hawed around, and I said, I'm really thinking about getting a sponsor. I really kind of need a sponsor. Could you kind of maybe I should have one? And he goes, yeah, okay, and walked away. And that happened for about 3 months. And then finally I said, would you sponsor me? And he says, you go away and come back in 30 days, and if you still want me, I'll sponsor you. And that was the longest 30 days I think I've ever, that's the second longest. My first real 30 days clean was my longest 30 days, but that took a long time too. And so I agreed to take some suggestions, and he agreed to give me some suggestions. And he's in this room now, and I'll go ahead and give a shout out. It's Derek. And we started working, and he said we're going to have to work the steps, because that's my sponsor taught me to work the steps, and his sponsor taught him to work the steps, and so we worked the steps because that's what a sponsor's for. So I didn't know anything about the steps. I really didn't. I mean, I kind of had read them and memorized them, therefore I knew them. I knew I had to work them now, and because now I was truly clean, and they kept telling me that I had to work the steps. So I bought the Step Working Guide, and I opened the first page, and I've been taught in this program to read from the first letter on the first page of a book, not from, page 15. And so in the preface, which that actually is the way you pronounce it, of the Step Working Guide, it says, there's probably only one inappropriate way to use these guides: alone. We can't overemphasize the importance of working with a sponsor in working the steps. In fact, in our fellowship, the sponsor is considered first and foremost, a guide through the 12 steps. If you haven't asked someone to sponsor you, please do so before starting the guides. So it's absolutely, positively necessary. I believe that is the core of sponsorship. There's all these other things that can happen. There's all these other blessings. There's all these other things I'm grateful for. But it comes down to, I need to work the steps because I don't have a clue how to do it, and you've done it. Please tell me how you've done it. It took me getting humble enough to ask for help. And in the basic text, it talks about, once we humble ourselves and ask for help, then help becomes available. But we can't do it until we realize that we can't do it alone. And so he started me working the steps, and I had him as a sponsor for kind of going to the end of the story. Well, you know what? I used him in every single step. He was a long-distance sponsor. It's an hour's drive from my house to his house, and we were on the phone all the time. And many times it was, okay, I didn't talk to him for a week and a half, but then we get on the phone, we talk for 4 hours, He helped me with the first step. He helped me with the second step. And I'm emphasizing this because, first of all, there's many steps where it's just impossible to work without a sponsor. How in the world could I work the 5th step without a sponsor? I need a sponsor in the 9th step to say, you know what, you don't owe amends to these people. You owe amends to these people you haven't even written down yet, and you haven't thought about it. I can't work the 9th step without a sponsor. There are, a sponsorship is implied in every single step, and it's actually in the basic text written into, or in the It Works How and Why. It's actually written into about 7 of the steps. It's just impossible to do without a sponsor. And there was a lot of empathy. He knew where I'd been. When I did a 5th step with him, we got together, and I took the opportunity to write this book because I'd already had some experience on writing an autobiography. So I decided to expound on this, and it was a big one. And we spent a long time on it. And I thought it was going to be, I laid a lot of crap there, I got to tell you. I really did. I'm someone who believes that a home group meeting is not someplace that you go and bleed all over the tables and throw up. If you want to do that, you go to your sponsor and dump it on him, and he'll deal with it. He'll help you deal with it. He's been there. He probably went through the same things, and he'll help. It's not necessarily the best place where there's a bunch of newcomers who needs to hear a clear message of hope to go through those gut-wrenching decisions and pain. That's what a sponsor is for, and that's what I used my sponsor for. So we worked, and we didn't rush at all. I was in no hurry, but I did do work. And I did a lot of writing. We did this 4th step, and we went to the 3rd Saturday dance. And well, first of all, we did the 4th step together, and we went through the whole thing. And I was, like I said, really bearing my soul with all this stuff. And he was right there with me. Let me tell you, he's like, he could match me the whole sick and indulgent episode for every sick and indulgent episode, you know. Whatever I had done, he just kind of shook his head, just like the basic text says that a sponsor does in the fifth step, you know, knowingly, you know, yeah, been there, you know, got the T-shirt. And it was wonderful. We went to a Saturday night dance, and we did a ceremonial burning in step 5 after we went through step 5. Step 6 was really important with him because, well, step 3 was really important because I didn't realize that you can't just do step 3 and it's done. You know, step 3 is never finished. I have to turn my will and my life over every single day, sometimes several times a day or an hour, you know. I didn't realize that. I thought you do a step, it's done, you set it aside, you go on to the next one. And the step 3 was the one that really taught me that. Step 6 taught me a whole lot about frustration. It's also an ongoing step. And I worked at these character defects for months. And you know, I see this character defect. It was like I got to a point where every time I turned around, I saw a character defect I had. And I finally thought, how do I get rid of these? How do I get rid of these? Again, if I'd read that part of the basic text, or it's stuck in my mind, I would have known that it says, you don't. You become entirely ready. You know, it's not, you can't do it. Just like step 1, you don't have power over your addiction. Well, you don't have power over your character defects. For that, you need the help of a power greater than yourself. And that comes in step 7. And it was just like a light bulb went off. After months of struggling, it was just like a light bulb went off, and it all made sense. And I was able to move from step 6 to step 7, realizing that in the long run, I have to do step 6 and step 7 for the rest of my life. They talk about 10, 11, 12 being maintenance steps, but 6 and 7 I have to do every day of my life too, because I have to look at my character defects and turn them over. Like I said, I had to go through the whole list, and we had to move people around and take people off, and I had to put my name on, because even though it says to do that, I forgot to put my name on there as somebody I owe an amends to, you know. And I got to tell you, I'm going to save the 12th step for the end of when I get finished talking. Now, let me say this, kindly and gently and as wonderful as possible. I appreciate my predecessors. My predecessors gave me this program, and freely, and gave me suggestions and said, you don't have to do this, but it could save your life. You know, just take responsibility for your actions. So I moved through, so I had this meeting with, we had a sponsorship family retreat, and I asked the question, how do you know when you're far enough along in the program to sponsor somebody else? And it kind of came down to, well, the minimum is you need to be through step 5 because you don't know anything about yourself. How can you have anything to give anybody else unless you've done at least an inventory? And I said, well, that makes sense. So I did, and somebody asked me to sponsor him. Wonderful man. They had nothing in common with me at all. I have a bachelor's degree from IUSB. I have a master's degree from Massachusetts, from Boston University. UMass Boston, excuse me. And I've got several certificates in computers, etc. after that. This man could not read or write when he came into the program. He learned how to write his name after he got here, and that was it. And he learned how to read out of the basic text. I had him for a sponsee for 7 years. And let me give you a little story. When I was in active addiction, I was with my first lover, and he was. I met him. I was out in a bar with his best friend having an affair, and he walked in, and we had a public fight. You know, screaming across the bar. It was just terrible. It was one of those cat fights, you know, from hell. And he called me a whore, and I said everything I know I learned from him. And he stormed out, and he went over to another bar, was walking across the street, and got hit and killed in a hit-and-run accident in South Bend. And I went through guilt. And I mean, I went through guilt to where I cried so much I got nosebleeds. Didn't know how to deal with it at all. Used more drugs to deal with it, you know. The one thing I did learn eventually was that I didn't want to go through that again. And so Roger, at the last year, got diagnosed as having lung cancer. And I decided that my service work was going to entail taking him to his chemo and taking him to all of his doctor's appointments. And I did that as much as I possibly could, helped him get his medications all set up and all that. And so one day he was at home. They basically had given up. And I went up to him and I said, okay, I had a doctor's appointment the next day. But I went up to him and I said, he couldn't even dress by now. He is at home, hospice care. And I said, I love you, man. And he says, I love you too. And I went home. I did what I had to do at the doctor's office the next day. I was driving back. I said, I know something's wrong. I know something's wrong. I drove right past my house to get to his house, pulled in the driveway, and his daughter told me that he had passed. But you know what? The last thing I said to him was that I loved him. And that was the most beautiful thing in the world, to leave that way. To leave somebody with that, you know. I'm so blessed to have had him in my life. Because I do believe that people, and there's a story in the basic text that talks about it, people in our lives are borrowed from God. They truly are. Be grateful for them while they're here. There's no guarantee for tomorrow. And I'm old enough, because I'm getting old, that I know people come, people go, people move. And you only have so much precious life for the people who are in your life now. So live in the moment. You know, I know I'm giving advice, but no, I'm giving a suggestion to live in the moment. And the reason it's a suggestion is because I've lived through it. There's a real big difference between suggestions and advice. To me, advice is, you know, I can tell you how to have a baby. You know, that's advice, because I don't know diddly squat about it. Everybody has advice, but I can give you a suggestion on how to work the 8th step, because I've worked the 8th step. That's a suggestion. So anyway, we went on, and some lady came to me. I picked up a second sponsee. Okay, now I have to tell you, since nobody knows this, I know it's a big secret, but I'm gay. And yes, yeah, really. And this is relevant to the story. This is not an outside issue, because my first sponsee was proudly bisexual. My second sponsee was confused transsexual. And it went on from there. And so there were a lot of sexual ambiguity in the sponsees that I was picking up. And there was and mind you, my sponsor told me that if somebody reaches out to ask for help, that's my responsibility to help them. And there is no such thing as a sponsor firing a sponsee. That's what he told me. Now, other people, that's fine. But he told me, you know, as long as I have something somebody wants, I have an obligation in an A to try to help them get that from me. And so I don't fire my sponsees. What I do sometimes is say, you know what, if there's chronic relapsing, for example, I say, maybe you need something more than I have to offer. You know, maybe you should consider at least going out for professional help with this or with that, you know, whether it's counseling or a minister. And again, maybe you want to consider changing sponsors if you're not getting from me what you need. But I don't fire them. I don't believe in that. And so in this storyline, a woman came to me, and she came into the program, and I said, you really need a sponsor. You really need a sponsor. Well, she didn't have a car. We're isolated in LaPorte. And she said, so I sent her to the other fellowship. Very mixed message. She relapsed right away. Another woman came into the program. I sent her to a different woman in the other fellowship. And this happened over and over and over again. Finally, I went to Region one time, and I drove back, and I parked, and this woman came up to me crying because her sponsor who was in the other fellowship, fired her, just dumped her. And I said, I'll help you. I'll help you. And I do want to read. Now, and again, this is why I said I'm so grateful for my predecessors, but things have changed. There's a recognition that not everybody is heterosexual. And in the sponsorship book that not everybody likes a whole lot of, it does say this about gender. It says the gender of our sponsor, that is, the question of whether or not we should get a sponsor of the same sex, is another area where opinions vary widely from community to community and addict to addict. Many addicts feel strongly that the same-sex sponsor can better help them to work through the certain issues and more easily identify with them and feel empathy for them, which makes sense because they have that in common. Others do not see gender as a determining factor in working through the issues and establishing empathy. In some smaller NA communities, a number of potential local sponsors may be limited, influencing members' choice in this regard. Regardless of what we decide about the gender of our sponsor, we should be careful that sexual attraction is not an issue in our sponsorship relationship. Now, this sponsee actually was, so I picked her up as a sponsee, and I struggled with this. I prayed about it. I asked people in both fellowships. I asked men and women, lots of them with a lot of time. And this is in the whole process where NA was becoming less rigid in the idea that a male has to sponsor a male and a female has to sponsor a female. What I'm getting to is that I do sponsor women, and I continue to sponsor women. There are some specific reasons that I don't need to tell you why it's appropriate for me to sponsor these women. I feel comfortable with it. God and I had a whole lot of talk about it. I don't recommend it for everybody. It's right for me for now. Okay, it truly is. And you know, I also wanted to read this about the newcomer. It says, this is kind of a summary of the sponsorship functions. It says, we found it helpful to have the sponsor and to use the sponsor. Sponsorship is a two-way street. It helps both the newcomer and the sponsor. The sponsor's clean time and experience may well depend upon the availability of sponsors locally. Sponsorship for newcomers is also the responsibility of the group. It is implied and informal in its approach, but it is the heart of an NA recovery from addiction, one addict helping another. So it is also the responsibility of the group. And as far as the newcomers, because I heard somebody say that a newcomer is an energy vampire. And, you know, it doesn't have to be that way. That's my responsibility as someone who is trying to carry the message of recovery to determine how much energy I'm willing and able to give. It truly is. I have to learn what my part is. I have to take responsibility for my decisions. And they can be tough, but there's times when I have to say no. It also says that we cannot afford to lose sight of the importance of sponsorship and of taking a special interest in the confused addict who wants to stop using. Experience shows clearly that those who get the most out of the Narcotics Anonymous program are those for whom sponsorship is important. Sponsorship responsibilities are welcomed by us and accepted as opportunities to enrich our personal NA experience. Now, I know that opportunities is one of those code words in business. It means that there's something that's really a whole lot of work to do. You know, as soon as possible. If somebody came up to me and said, you know what, I need a sponsor, or do you think that it's right for me to get a sponsor? I only have 30 days. I would say yes, absolutely. There's no too early for a sponsor. Sponsorship does not have to be, when you pick a sponsor, especially early in recovery, it doesn't have to be someone that you have to have for the rest of your life. What you're going through right now, someone can help you with. You know, somebody can sponsor you for now. You can get a temporary sponsor. Then you can make it, and you can make a change if you think that it's necessary. But I also wanted to read this just real quickly, because sponsorship has to do with the 12th step, getting back to the 12th step. It really does. It's carrying the message to the addict who still suffers. And I think that's the greatest others to live. That's not what it says. The message says that an addict, any addict, can stop using drugs, lose the desire to use, and find a new way to live. It does not say after some addicts die, the rest can stop using drugs. It doesn't say that. It says any addict. We can't exclude addicts and say, oh, they died, they had to die for me to be there. I'm not responsible for somebody else's decision to use, to OD, and to commit suicide. And I think that's very important message. I love sponsorship, and it really is the reason I get up. It keeps me grounded. Every day I pray with gratitude to God for my sponsor and my sponsees and my entire sponsee family. Every day I ask that God help me to be a better sponsor and a better sponsee. I don't say no to sponsees. I don't say no to someone who asks me, but to be a sponsor. I do sit down with them right after I agree to sponsor somebody, and we go over the rules of the game, which is all in the sponsorship booklet. And I really like that. And I was going to read a little bit of that, but you know, you've got the sponsorship, the Orange IP. That is an absolutely wonderful IP because it explains what sponsorship is. Don't know where I got it. Don't know where I ended up. But no, I brought it somewhere. Anyway, it does talk about what sponsorship is and what sponsorship is not. And it's important to explain to your sponsees what sponsorship is not. You are not a cab, a social service, a marriage counselor, et cetera, a bank. You know, you're none of those things. A sponsorship is to help you through the steps. It's to show empathy and to help you through recovery. I do think that it's rooted in the 12th step and the 5th tradition about carrying the message to the still suffering addict. And I'm very grateful that you asked me to speak today. Thank you.